Welcome to the BrightWord Books Podcast. BrightWord is a leading platform for diverse storytelling, where voices from all backgrounds can share their unique narratives and connect with readers from around the world. Follow our regular podcast updates, where we strive to foster a literary community that celebrates creativity, inclusivity, and the transformative power of literature. Hello, and welcome to the BrightWord Books Podcast. I'm your host, John Lobb, and today a very intriguing guest. Crystal Tenney is with us today to talk about her book, Are You an Asshole Boss? Micronegativity in Leadership, exposing the subtle yet toxic leadership behaviors. Crystal, thanks so much for being with us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm genuinely excited to be here.
Absolutely. What an intriguing title, and I think something we can all relate to. I for sure have thought of managers in the past who maybe were not the most pleasant. And I think this thought of micro behaviors, micro negativity, is particularly intriguing because I think all of us can relate to having a boss that they're not outrageous, but there's just something about the way they manage or something about the way they supervise. If you would, let us know how you came about writing the book and what drove you to that title and that content.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an interesting story, and it's a story that began when I was 18 years old. I had my first real job and a boss that everyone loved. I thought he was great. The team thought he was great until corporate let him go for not sharing their values. And that moment planted this now lifelong question of how can someone beloved by their team be dismissed by leadership? And that started a trickle of thought processes in my brains. And I started to pay attention and analyzing leaders like almost like a scientist, if you will, for the ones that I truly got along well with and that I adored and admired and respected. Those that I feared or I perceived other team members feared. And over the years, certain patterns had emerged. So I had worked my first corporate job at 18. I had led many different corporate jobs thereafter. And I noticed that over the years, patterns had emerged. So leadership wasn't a badge, it was a behavioral ecosystem. So my naive brain at 18 years old thought there was this class you take or a certificate that you hold that says, hey, I completed leadership, I know what I'm doing, I can lead my team, I can do all the things. And spoiler alert, that's not the case at all. You have those who have earned promotions, those who are tossed into a leadership role to essentially fill a warm seat. So it comes with a lot of different caveats as to what leadership is. So the title, Are You an Asshole Boss, came from my frustration, actually, of watching great people unknowingly create micro toxicity. And I wrote this book in a way that kind of has kid gloves. So it's not, despite the provocative title, it's not an insult. It's actually more of an intervention or creating that self-awareness within you. A mirror that says, if you flinch at this title, maybe it's time to look a little closer and do that, the self-reflection.
Wonderful, wonderful. How intriguing. And there may be folks out there who say, gee whiz, that does sound a little bit like me. And I understand that the book intends to provide a blueprint to its readers so that if they identify parts of themselves in the book, that they can take action. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So that's a great question. I can go many different directions. So in the book, when I call out those microtoxicity, micro-negative habits, I provide you psychological and like a neuroscience behind those behaviors, more or less to provide sort of context as to why someone may act in this manner. It could be deep-rooted from childhood or behaviors that were, let's say, witnessed by predecessors to say, that got the reaction they wanted, so I'm going to mirror that also, or just lack of leadership education. But then I also point out and call out the characteristics of this behavior. So a leader who acts in these behaviors, this is what it looks like. So you can identify it within yourself and or with others. But I also give you the effects on the employees. So even if you let's say you're like, I don't act in that manner. This doesn't apply to me. However, when you see the effects on the employees, you might be more cognizant to maybe not act in those behaviors that I had called out. But then I also provide short and long-term solutions to combat these behaviors. Even if you say like, ooh, I don't want to act in this behavior, so I'm going to do this to be kind of preventative, or oops, I'm feeling a little guilty and now I know how to course correct.
So it sounds like very actionable insights, not just a theory, but something that a person can take and work on, which I think is very valuable. We might mention, by the way, that Crystal is a leadership coach and organizational consultant. So Crystal definitely knows what she's talking about when it comes to dynamics in the workplace. Crystal, you also talk about nice people, quote unquote, who may fall into the trap of being a micromanager or deploying these negative aspects. It sounds like an asshole boss is not necessarily an asshole person. It could be a very nice person who inadvertently or maybe subconsciously is deploying some of these traits. Is that the case?
Absolutely. That's actually why I wrote the book, to call out these micro negative behaviors. What I've noticed in my own observations, as well as conducting some unofficial interviews with others throughout the years, is that these bosses are completely unaware that they're acting in these micro negative manners. For instance, interrupting during a meeting, that could be perceived as enthusiasm. You're thinking you're being enthusiastic, you're sharing with the vibe of the meeting, or you're micromanaging is because you see an employee who's really great, they just need an extra hand holding because you know the result will be amazing. Instances like that. However, there's also the other side to that, where it's the sigh, we've all been there. You're in a meeting and someone goes to speak up and everyone goes, one of those, or the unintentional eye roll that's almost like an automatic habit at this point. And when we do those, even outside of our professional lives, even in our personal lives, those little micro moments do add up. And we don't do them intentionally. And this actually can even apply to tone of voice as well, facial expressions. I have the worst poker face. And so I am guilty of this without even trying, to be perfectly honest. And so we're all guilty of this, but it's more or less about bringing on the self-awareness and how it's not how we think we're perceived, it's how others perceive us, because that will trigger the brain to say, this person is safe. This person is not safe in those contexts. So when you carry out these micro negative behaviors, it's kind of communicating to your team, nonverbal, how they're going to then carry out their duties for you. Are they going to be more creative? Are they going to be innovative? Are they going to take initiative? Are they going to go above and beyond for you? If you're acting in these micro negative behaviors, the answer is no. It's a flat out no. But when you read the book and you read the short term and the long term solutions to combat these behaviors, the turnaround, especially for the immediate solutions, it's something as simple. And I love using this example because it is very impactful and it has the most impact, more than anyone will realize, is taking a pause before you walk into a meeting, taking a pause before you answer or respond to a question. So when we take a moment to pause, we are actually able to ground ourselves into the decision that we're about to make, into the thought process. We actually can complete the thought process instead of acting impulsively. I love sharing this example from a previous client where he was working on a really big project and he had put all this information into a spreadsheet, and he was trying to showcase to the client how much money they were saving them. And in the end, it didn't get the result because in a cell, one of the cells in the Excel spreadsheet, there was a number that he had inadvertently typed in, and it was in some random cell in the spreadsheet, and it calculated it. And so it made the number appear much larger than it was supposed to. And his initial reaction was to actually get upset with finance and everyone else who had looked at this spreadsheet before sending it to the client. The problem with that was they trusted him and his expertise to have the numbers correct. They didn't have anything else to bounce that number off or compare it to. They trusted him that he did his work and, did with his due diligence And he wanted to get mad at everyone else but himself. And I said, whoa, 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 let's take a little moment. Let's have a timeout and let's breathe. Just take a moment. And when you take a breath, he was able to collect all of his thoughts. And he went, that's actually no one else's fault but my own. He said, unfortunately, yes. But then we were able to then redirect that focus instead of blaming and pointing fingers to being more solution oriented. So we're able to shift that focus, which was amazing. He then took that pause, and instead of being impulsive with, firing off responses or those immediate replies, etc., taking a moment, he was able to gather thoughts, and he started to slowly gain a little more respect from his team, which I thought was amazing. But then he took that to his personal life, which is my favorite, and he was able to form better relationships and actually just found the love of his life maybe a year afterwards, because he was putting in the time and putting in the effort to commit to making this small change. This one small change made such a tremendous impact on his life, professionally and personally.
Wow, what an example and a terrific story. And it's a reminder that people are not going to change. A manager's not going to change if they don't realize how they're coming across. And for everyone out there who is thinking, gee, I wish my boss would change the way they are, maybe they need to buy a copy of the book and leave it on their desk and get them thinking, get them to read this information and be aware. Because if they're not aware they're doing it, they're not going to change their behavior.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And, when I do a lot of my trainings, I almost sound like a broken record when I talk about self-reflection, self-reflection, self-reflection. But a lot of that is just looking at the way you're showing up, not for others, but also yourself. I find often journaling is really fantastic. I write down a lot of information. For instance, I like to do a practice with some of my clients where I say, write down, literally pen to paper, write down. I mean, typing's easier for you. That's okay too. And tell me about the biggest highlight of your day and give me all the details. I want everything, dialogue, etc. But then also tell me a point in your day where you felt as though maybe something was amiss, where you left a meeting and you felt a little like, did we resolve this? Was this question asked? Did that seem off? Or how come we went in with point A, but we ended up looping, several times through G, H, and I, which wasn't even anywhere on anyone's radar? Like, how did we get so far off base? But then kind of looping it back. But then what I love about self-reflection is when you can kind of get down to the root of the issue. So we kind of narrow down and narrow down and narrow down, and you get to your personal stake in the situation. It doesn't even have to be an issue. It could be anything. And then we label it, which I absolutely love. So a lot of times people believe like, oh, I'm so mad. Mad is a very blanketed emotion. But when you label your emotions for exactly what they are and you allow yourself to feel them and you go through the process of feeling these emotions, much like grieving, but every feeling has its own emotion, then you're able to stop behaviors or recognize them before they start. A great example is, I just mentioned how a lot of people say, well, I'm mad. What if you were feeling was sadness? So you're mad your friends didn't invite you out. They invited everyone else, but you felt excluded. But instead of being mad and firing off text messages like, like, how dare you exclude me, or being passive aggressive, etc., what those responses, what you could say, just take time to self-reflect, go inward and ask, like, why didn't they want to invite me? And then recognize that this is actually a feeling of sadness. You feel sad that you weren't, but why are you sad? And let's go deeper, deeper, deeper. And when we can label it, then we're able to kind of bloom from this emotion. In this, the works with positive as well. And then when we bloom from this emotion, next time this happens, you would recognize, ooh, I'm starting to feel sad. Actually, this emotion, sadness, this is how I experience it. Why do I feel sad? And then we go deep, deep. I use this with my life coaching clients. Recently, I was working with a client and they actually had asked me to sit in with their leadership. I was supposed to be a fly on a wall, kind of take pulse and inventory of their entire leadership team. This is, I believe there's about 20 people, and their job titles and their roles expanded widely throughout the company. So you had those C-suite executives, you had admin assistants and team leads and everyone in between. And they knew that their leadership needed some help or a little nudge along the way. And they said, can you please sit in and just be a fly on the wall? We're going to tell everyone to ignore you and just, I want you to take notes. I want you to analyze body language. I want you to analyze tone of voice. I want you to analyze the words that are being said and who they're directed to, and give us a full comprehensive report on where you feel are our weak points, where we need to improve, and what we're really doing very well. And I said, I think that's a fantastic idea. And actually, it started kind of getting gears in my head to have a new product to supply to current clients, which I thought was fantastic. So I sat in on the leadership board, and it was great. And I could notice the tone when everyone started to kind of forget that I was there. Of course, initially everyone's on their best behavior. Everyone's nice, civil, cordial. And then probably around the hour mark, everyone forgot about me. And I started to notice shifting of body language. You started out with hands on the table, which I thought was fantastic because that shows that you're engaged and you're welcoming. And then all of a sudden, arms were crossed. You saw legs were crossed and people were slumped in their chairs. You saw eventually people were just on their phone scrolling, complete disengagement. And I noticed this and I wrote down the timestamp and I said, what was the turning point of this disengagement? Out of 20 people, I'm looking at 15 people who are disengaged. What happened? And when we kind of rewind that tape, it started when I want to say it was one of the VPs just got up and started talking. And he was rambling on about, actually it didn't even make sense what he was saying. It was not on the agenda, and he sort of took the meeting and he ran with it and lost a lot of people. Others tried to chime in and kind of course correct, and he bulldozed over their interjections. He seemed to kind of like tyrant, and when the third person tried to intervene and say, okay, well, can we go back to the agenda, we'll get to this, they're very nice and respectful. And the kind of the tyrant leadership came out, and I was a little shocked. And over the next 45 minutes, he just went on this rant. And I thought it was really interesting because this meeting was about a grand opening to one of their locations. And it was supposed to be a great, big, positive, enthusiastic, who's going to be where, who's doing what, ribbon cutting. And you saw no enthusiasm. There was, we'll say, I don't know, positivity.
Positive
And
energy.
positive energy. Thank you. There was none of that. And I thought it was really interesting. And so when they said, what should we do next time? And I said, exclude this VP from the meeting. Exclude him and see what happens. So they called another meeting because actually they ran over their time and they didn't even get through more than half of the items on their agenda. And they did. So they excluded him. And what a change of behavior. It was very positive. Everyone's including their feedback. There was a lot of camaraderie, which I was glowing about because I was actually worried that that's one of the things they were lacking, was that inclusivity, that community feeling. And nope, they flying colors, and they had it all planned out, and actually half the time that the meeting was scheduled for. And I thought it was great. So then I started to rewind back, and when it was actually, believe it or not, I thought this was an incredible observation. When the assistant to the president of the company started to kind of run the meeting, she was more respected and well seen and valued at a higher level than the VP of the company. Isn't that phenomenal?
Interesting.
Yes.
Oh.
And
you helped them to realize what was happening. In other words, they needed that outside person to kind of lift the veil and show them what was happening. So what a great service to that company.
Absolutely. And and it also goes to show that title isn't everything. Just because you hold a position of leadership doesn't make you a leader. It's how you treat others and how others feel when they're in your presence. And I actually jokingly, I said, someone needs to promote her. Oh no, wait, don't, because you can't lose her. But she should be running this company. She knew all the ins and outs. She knew the details and the nuances of everything. And she also knew how to communicate with every person in that room, despite their title, despite their seniority, and despite their experience. And I thought it was truly phenomenal the way that she was able to connect.
I worked in banking years ago, and I remember a VP sharing with me at one time something that stuck with me through my career. He said, "Do you know who the most important person in the bank branch is?" And I said, "Well, I assume it's the branch manager." And he said, "No, it's the teller. Those are the folks that, while they may be the lowest paid or even entry level, they interact with our customers more often than anyone else in the branch." So true. So true. Do you
Absolutely.
find that this negative behavior, Crystal, is an epidemic these days? I mean, how common do you think it is?
Epidemic, I'm going to say yes. As we know, there were many, and my book actually kind of goes through in the first chapter. I give a brief overview synopsis of how leadership has changed throughout the years and how we've sort of landed into the leadership realm where we are today, especially with remote work, post-pandemic, etc. And I think epidemic is a great way to describe, because when you have certain individuals in leadership, they are mimicking what they think is what leadership should look like, whether they're following in their predecessors' footsteps or the opposite of following in their footsteps because they say, my predecessor was a terrible boss. I want to do the opposite of what he did. Okay, great. Or the lack of education. Once again, filling a warm seat, or someone thinks they're ready, but turns out that they weren't ready for this type of role. And when you think of a bad boss, you think of someone who's a bully, or harasser, someone who's walking around, yelling, berating, slamming doors, I don't know, hitting fists on tables, throwing big temper tantrums. And that's not always the case. It's the silent behavior. It's interesting because the only example that really comes to mind is it's a term known as death by a thousand cuts. And so it's very similar to where the one cut isn't going to hurt, one paper cut, but imagine you had 1,000 of them. You're going to notice, it's going to be painful, and until you stop performing those behaviors and acting in this manner, then you can stop with the cuts. So micro negativity in leadership is practically an epidemic, because the workplace is geared towards rewarding results and not responses. So micro negativity hides inside what we label as efficiency, directness, and standards. But most employees won't name it. They'll just I say emotionally unsubscribe. And since this engagement is quiet, leaders misinterpret silence as compliance often. That term, no news is good news, essentially. When that happens, that's when you get employees who are burnt out, or they're quiet quitting, or they're just, coming in, putting their heads down, doing their jobs, and leaving. And you're really missing out on the knowledge that the employee could bring to the table, their creativity, the innovation, etc. And an endemic, I think that's a great way to describe micro negativity in leadership in today's world.
Wow. And what role does empathy play? I'm assuming that that VP that was excluded from a meeting, that made for a better follow-up meeting. He can't be treated, or he or she can't be treated as an ogre and always excluded going forward. I'm assuming that the organization would want to reach out to that individual and help them understand what the experience was and invite them to get some help, as opposed to saying, "Joe, you're never going to be invited to another meeting ever again." Is that a true statement, Crystal?
Yes, it actually is. And that's why I really enjoy executive coaching, because then they kind of tapped me and they're like, okay, you did great here, but now we're going to tap you. And can you go talk with him and, have this little conversation? And I said, absolutely. And what I wrote down facts for the VP. I wrote down all the facts. I said, this is what happens in your presence. And then this is what happens outside of your attendance to this meeting. And he kind of looked them over, and he's a numbers guy. So I provided the information in a way that he would
Could relate
respect
to.
and
Yep.
value and relate to.
Yep.
Absolutely. And then I explained to him how empathy it's like a neuro reset button for culture, because his behavior wasn't just micro negativity at a at a boss level, it was actually also kind of bleeding into company culture, which when that was brought to his attention, he kind of sat back and went, whoa. And he had kind of like this light bulb moment in his head, because for him, he thought he was enthusiastic, he was bringing all these ideas to the table, and he just wanted to finish his thought before someone else chimed in. And he really thought he was just bringing out this he was bringing out the camaraderie, and he was trying to pull it and pull it and pull it from each person. And he said, you don't pull camaraderie, you build camaraderie. And there's a really big difference. And if you're looking, and it was almost like, and I did see his point, because he was saying how like the more people were disengaged as he was, trying to build and, pull, that almost made him want to try harder and continue trying. And he was getting a little discouraged, if you will. And which was respectful. But when you mirror emotions and validate perspective, you trigger the oxytocin in the brain, which then neuralizes cortisol, and then it reopens the brain's learning pathways. So by kind of following in that pattern, I was able to create these aha moments so he could see the impact he had, whether that was positive or negative, and then kind of recourse correct, and then see the efforts that others were putting into helping him. They want him to succeed. They supported, what he was saying and the whole mission with the point of the meeting, but then to kind of value that. So I was showing him how empathy isn't a weakness. It's not a weakness. And it's so construed as this way, but it's not. But more or less in his case, it was about data collection. So it lets you read, like the emotional algorithm running through the team and through the meeting.
Interesting.
Yes.
Crystal, our time unfortunately is running down today, but before I let you go, what would be the one main message that you would hope a reader would take from your book?
Ooh, that's a great question. I structured the book in a way that would be multifaceted for readers who would, think about a leadership position, are kind of a little bit seasoned or dipping their toe, or they're, C-suite executives who could, they could have written this book better than myself. But I also wanted to offer many different lenses. So when we dive into the psychological and the neuroscience aspect of certain behaviors, and, calling out those micronegative behaviors, as well as the effect on the employees, that even if you don't identify with those behaviors, you would be kind of consciously in the back of your brain to keep yourself in check, but also to help others who you do see acting in this manner, to kind of go ahead and coach and kind of redirect their behavior as well, and self-awareness. So I hope it gives leaders permission to be honest with themselves, because we've all had moments where stress made us react, or reactive or blind to certain situations. And this book is not about calling you out or finger pointing or blaming. It's about brain change with the neuroscience aspect of it. So I just wanted to spark a global movement from unconscious leadership to neuro leadership, where empathy, awareness, and accountability are competitive advantages and not signs of weakness, or sort of the famous saying, like, we've always done it this way, so this is how we're going to do it. But change is possible. And I think when you change the mind of a leader, you change the culture of the entire organization.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, I'm sure that there are folks out there who perhaps are recognizing just a little bit of themselves in what we've been talking about today. If you're one of those people, or if you know someone who perhaps could benefit from this book, again, Crystal Tenney, the author of Are You an Asshole Boss? Micro-Negativity in Leadership. Crystal, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I know the book is
Thank you
available
for
now
having
on Amazon. If folks were interested in working with you on coaching, is there a way that they can get in touch with you, Crystal?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. My website is www.stradavancellc.com, and I will spell that STRATOVANCE.com. And there's a list of my services, etc. And they can contact me directly. They can also purchase the book as well. There's an ebook and hardcover, as well as the list of services.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you again. And for all of you who have joined us today, thank you for watching the BrightWord Books Podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode. You've been listening to the BrightWord Books Podcast, home of the literary community that celebrates creativity, inclusivity, and the transformative power of literature. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss future episodes. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.